The sheet bend is a very useful knot for joining two loose ends of rope together, or by joining it to a fixed loop like this angler's loop. It has origins in sailing. It was originally used to affix to the corner of a sail for trimming or controlling the actual sail, hence sheet bend, and it works quite well. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. If you're attaching it to a single loop, go ahead and fold it over so you have a bite in the line. You want to come up through it, back behind it, and then back under itself. And you always want to make sure to tighten things down by hand before an actual load is applied. And you also need to realize that some knots are not meant to have extreme working loads applied to it, some are. For instance, the reef or square knot is not supposed to have a heavy working load on it, but we'll get into that later. But for now, this comes out quite nice and easy. Another thing to remember is anytime you have two loose ends that you're working with, you want to make sure after the knot is tied that both the loose ends are on the same side of the knot. This will help with strength. It helps keep the center of the line aligned with itself. Now technically, this is the back of the knot. For ease of showing you, it shows you how things are actually tied. When we flip it over, you'll notice later on this actually resembles the standard bowline loop. So let's go ahead and untie that and show you that again. And again, this, even after this has a working load on it, comes undone nice and easy. Let's take a look at that again. I'm just going to put a bite in my line. Come up from behind. Go around the whole thing. And then back under itself. Making sure to hand tighten it before any actual working load is applied to it. If you're joining your loose end to an already fixed loop, you don't need to worry about having the tag end of the rope end up on the same side, as it won't affect the strength or how the line actually pulls on itself. For instance, this time I'm going to go down, back around itself, and then back under itself on this side, which is actually just a mirror image of what I did the first time when I demonstrated it. So now my ends are actually on different sides, but since it's to a fixed loop, this doesn't make any difference. You can probably see that when you pull this, everything tightens down nicely and follows a straight line. So that's a typical sheet bend. It works quite well. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as a Becket Hitch when it's attached to a fixed loop. Don't know any real reason for that, but I've come across it many times, so if you ever hear Becket Hitch, that's what they're referring to. A sheet bend is a very good way to join two dissimilar sized pieces of cordage. However, you don't want to go too thin or too thick in either direction. For instance, if you were to attach monofilament or fishing line of some sort to this, well, that's probably not going to do much good, and it's just going to bite into the rope and break. So even though you can use different size cordage, you want to stay within reason. I'd say no more than half or a third, a fourth of the diameter of the larger end. And you always want to make sure to have your bite and what you're attaching to be on the thicker cordage. So just take a look at that real quick. Again, I'm going to come up from the bottom, around behind, and back under itself. So you can see you always need to tighten down, especially when using some thicker cords like this that's got some spring to it, and something floppy like this. Definitely got to hand tighten first. The double sheet bend is a great way to give strength to the standard sheet bend. Starts off the same way. Put a bite in our line at the end of our line. Come up through the bottom, giving ourselves a little more room to work this time. Coming around back once, going back around twice, and now go back under itself. This will give an extra hitch or crossing point over the line, giving it a little added security. especially when dealing with two dissimilar line pieces of cordage. The sheet bend is a very versatile knot and can even accommodate up to 2 other pieces of cordage. They all start off the same way. Come up through the bottom, around behind itself, and then back under itself. As you can see, sometimes working with different types of cordage, things get a little springy, a little tangled. I'm doing this on camera too, you know. But once you get back and tighten those down, you now have a way to, say, have a central loop, say, tied in a tree branch or something, and then 2 other cords. So that could be quite useful. You know, that might even be useful for a fishing situation. You could have hooks on here, or your sinker, or your floater. So this is a great way to attach 2 pieces of cordage. You could probably do 3, maybe even 4 pieces of paracord if it was on a larger line like this. I've never tried that. But again, these are not really meant, I think once you get past 2 lines, or 1 line rather, these are not meant for heavy working loads. This is just, you know, for simple joining, towing a log through the woods, connecting 2 things, you know, or perhaps if you break your ridge line for your tarp or something like that, you know, easy way to fix it. But again, tied the exact same way as your standard sheet bend. Let's go ahead and look at that again real quick. Now again, this is one of those knots that can be tied from either direction as long as the tag ends end up on the same side as your loop. Or for instance, if you're going to be using a fixed loop. If you're using a fixed loop, then it really doesn't matter. But let's go ahead and take a look at that. So now this would be slightly inappropriate, or inappropriate for any type of working load. You know, if I was just hanging a piece of gear off this, no problem. If I had the advantage of being able to use the thicker line as what I attached to, obviously you would want to do that. That may not be the case. But I'm going to come up through the loop. And you can see with floppier cord like this, it's a little harder to work with. But back around and back up under itself. Now, like I said, this is not ideal cordage to be doing this with. As you can see, it's a little fiddly and springy, but the purpose of showing you this is that sometimes you never know what kind of rope you're going to come across. You may find this just lying around and have to use it. It might already be attached to something. You know, the scenarios are endless. This is more of just to show you that obviously here's a way to do it that will work well if need be. And it come undone quite easy. So that's the 3-way sheet bend. Sometimes when you join 2 pieces of rope together, you need to have the tag end facing in a certain direction so that if you're towing it through the woods, let's say, or dragging it through water, whatever the case may be, both your ends are going in the same direction so that it's not forcing back against itself. And in that instance, a 1-way sheet bend works quite well. Let's take a look at that. Just like the other ones, I'm going to come up to the bottom of the loop, go around behind it, go back under itself. Now, I don't know if you noticed that, but that twisted up a little bit right here and got a little kink in it. You always want to make sure to try and remove that type of thing, especially out of any type of cordage that has an outer jacket like paracord does. If it twists up like that, it can create binding issues and possibly damage the cordage. You know, this stuff's pretty tough, so it's highly unlikely, but in doing it, you're actually reducing the breaking strength of the cordage. So you always want to make sure to try and get any kinks and twists out of it. So, now that we have what would be a standard sheet bend, we're just going to come back around top and back under itself this way. And come back under this bottom loop here. It's pretty simple. And that will give you the tag ends both on the same side and going in the same direction. So that now if I were towing this, you know, it wouldn't encounter anything and it wouldn't be forcing this undone. So it's a very useful knot. Let's take a look at that again. See, even if it comes undone a little bit, it still ends up retying itself to some degree. But with our fixed loop, we're going to come up through the bottom, go around itself, back under itself, and now we just want to bring the tag in around back top and back under itself again. Always remembering to hand tighten things as much as possible before an actual load is put onto it. The sheep bend has one final trick up its sleeve. It can also be used as a quick release knot. Very simple to tie, just like the other ones. Comes up through the bottom, goes around behind the loop. Now instead of taking the tag in and bringing it all the way back through itself, we're going to give ourselves a little more slack, as much as needed. And I'm going to take a bite in the line and come back under itself. So now this would actually pull through. This works really well, tightens down nice, and if need be, comes through and breaks free. Take a look at that again. Comes up through the bottom of the loop. Give ourselves a little more extra room this time. Go around behind the loop. And again, instead of passing the whole tag in through, we're just going to take a bite and bring that up under itself. Another thing, if you can see that, this has a little kink in it and is now crossed over itself. You want to try and avoid things like that. Again, that can end up tearing or damaging the outer weaving and casing of the paracord, or for that kind of, or any kind of cord, just for that matter. So that's something you always want to try and avoid. So go ahead and just finagle that over there. Again, remembering to hand tighten things as much as possible. So now we have a nice convenient quick draw loop. Now the only problem with this is that when I pull here, even though it can come through, it's actually still attached to the loop. So if there was weight on this end, or if it was attached, the standing end was attached to something, it wouldn't pull through cleanly and have to slide through. So it has its advantages and disadvantages. There is another knot called a lap knot, which takes care of this problem, which we'll show in a further video. But just to show you that again one more time, real quick. Take a bite in the line, pass it through itself, and tighten down. And you can actually go and set how long of a pull you want. You can make that loop extremely long so you had to pull a whole bunch. Or if you needed to, you could then pass this back down through it, and that would secure it a little bit so that it actually couldn't slip through. But works out quite well. So that's been the sheep bend series. More to come.